Okay, welcome to Stampscaping 101. This is a scene that I started on with a stamp sketch video. It's been sitting around for probably months now. And I utilized the scene in my previous video on defining forms and volumes through value. So on that video I just added a little bit of a kind of a gray scale tone over different objects within this given space right here. Actually, no, this is the one where I used the alcohol inks, okay? But I did it in kind of a grayscale form just to define some of these rocks and to make them look a little bit more round and more opaque, I guess you can say, and less transparent, you know, from just having one image down there. But I like kind of the way it was going. I liked some of the little tones that were kind of laid down just in a very minimal way around it, but I wanted to see how far I could take it, you know, throughout the entire scene. So I added a lot of alcohol ink marks in the scene to get my lighting kind of established, but I didn't like it too much, you know, just only as that, so I did go back in and I added some dye-based inks over the top of the alcohol inks, but it was kind of interesting to see if that would work, as I didn't know if the alcohol inks would be kind of more of a repellent to a water-based medium, such as dye-based inks. So, but it laid down just fine. Whether or not it's laying on the surface, you know, and not penetrating the alcohol ink, or if it's actually getting through the alcohol ink, I have no idea. But you can add dye-based inks apparently over the tops of alcohol inks. If I knew I was going to use this, though, I'd probably do it first. But I'm glad I didn't, because it's always good to test different processes out, especially when you're just kind of learning about it and experimenting with it. So anyway, a lot of things you can do with kind of a more specific type of tool than, you know, a oval round tip right here. These brush markers are a nice addition in terms of creating a different type of texture within a given space. So I don't know, little features like these little kind of shimmering little dots of color within that water, overlapped by other tones, blended in a little bit. I don't know, I kind of fiddled around with a lot of different types of things on here because I don't know what I'm doing with that medium, so kind of just a lot of experimentation. But I like the overall look, and like I said, you know, there's just certain things that you can't get utilizing something like just, you know, a stylus tool or whatnot, like all these little details down here and these little I don't know, grassy types of touches, you know, in the water and around the water's edge there. So anyway, fun stuff. Kind of a quick little video here in my little experiment with alcohol inks to kind of create what I usually do with dye-based inks, which is some kind of source of light and kind of a framing of the different imagery within a scene. Okay, what seems inevitable is if I'm working on some scene and just talking about some aspect of it and starting it in one video, I tend to want to go back and finish it off, and I usually figure that if I'm going to be doing that, I might as well put it into video form and see where it goes. Anyways, this scene here was done in a stamp sketch video. I don't recall which one it was, but I just started to render these rocks and some of the water a little bit in the previous video on modeling form to make forms and objects look a little bit more three-dimensional. I just used some alcohol inks on this one in the form of these pens here. You can use any pens that you want. The alcohol inks tend to work really well with the dye-based ink impressions because they're a different binder, so it won't smear what you've already laid down. But I don't know, I've stamped this one quite a while ago, and even if it was colored in dye-based inks, I'm not really quite sure if it would make the ink run or not. It might be, the inks might have been set for so long that you know, wouldn't run at all, but I'm not really sure. You just have to test it out. Ink and paint combinations, or rather ink and alcohol ink and paper combinations all tend to work a little bit differently depending on which ones you're using, and not all inks and surfaces are created equal, and then you have all the different combinations of those two together. And sometimes you are working in even more medium, multimedia, so there's all kinds of different variables that go into it. Anyways, I'm just using a very light, pale shade of, it's this kind of grayscale. It's periwinkle, but in terms of value, it's a very light one. And just adding this into my scene here. I'm used to working in a much wider applicator when I'm working with my sponging tips and whatnot. So this is a little bit different for me. It's kind of good, like almost like going in with, well, these are brush tip pens, so it's like using a kind of a more painterly type of approach to the addition of color here. So, but I don't know, I do like kind of a more watercolor loose type of feel in terms of my aesthetics. I don't do that, but I like the look of it, so I'm not really that good at it either. So I don't know, maybe I like it because I'm not good at it and wish I was, but I don't know, I'm kind of taking the same type of approach to my addition of color that I do with sponge tips. I tend to add color, you know, fairly slowly in terms of the building up of color. I tend to start really light, and then I'll work darker. Usually when I'm doing color work, I might do grayscale things as well, but I might be working in black ink, but it's still kind of lighter shades of gray that I'm working through, so that's what I like to do here. I like to kind of establish my my lighting scheme and figure out where things are going before I commit to kind of my darker tones. So, and also I'm not used to, I've done it before, but I'm not quite used to how alcohol inks tend to move on a paper. Like if you lay some down, then you go over it, you know, it puts the colors that you've laid down back into solution. So, but that being said, you can kind of work with that and benefit from some of the textures that can be achieved from that aspect of those colors. Alright, so kind of giving my water kind of a streaky look and establishing some areas of light and dark, okay? And the darker areas, again, they're very light, relatively speaking. I'll make them darker, but I'm kind of getting things established, seeing what I like first, okay? So why don't I go through that same type of process up here in the sky. I like to often match my skies with my water in terms of creating a reflective type of situation from sky and surface, in this case again being water. So see, I'm kind of working it from the outside in. It's going to be a little bit streaky, or a lot streaky. A lot streaky, really streaky, I should say. Okay. And we can bring in some more of those streaks like this down here. Try to keep it kind of loose. Alright, that was the periwinkle. Let's see, here's a Salvia Blue. Yeah, a little bit dark. Let me try to work through a color that's not too much darker than the color that I just laid down. Something like that. This one's aquamarine. More important than the actual hue, though, is the value of it. So, you know, I'm just trying to work basically light to dark. And when I am working light to dark, I try not to take too big of a value jump from one color to the next. I usually like to, you know, keep my incrementally darker colors just a little bit darker than the previous one, if I can. I don't always have the range of hue within a given range of values within a given hue, I should say. So sometimes I do have to make a bigger jump from one value to the next of a given hue. Okay, so when it's just a little bit of a jump in value, you see I can kind of, you know, get a little bit more free with my application of tone, because it's not leaving too big of a it's not making too big of a difference. Alright. Moving up, let's see if which one of these will be quite extreme. Let's try this one. I think gray would be nice as well. I'll start kind of creating a little bit of a deeper shadows, the shadow areas. Okay. What I'm trying to do here is I'm eventually trying to direct the viewer's eye to the figure here with a little bit of tone around it, you know. So that the image, the focal point, will be kind of in a, you know, a bit of a spotlight, you might say. I can feel this. It's really getting sticky because the this alcohol ink is really starting to build up on here. And when you get that build up, it kind of gets a little bit sticky. Okay, I'm adding some of this to the shadows of the rocks. I like to create a little bit of a relationship between objects and the light that might be reflected into the objects around that light. In this case, light is hitting the water and reflecting back up into the rocks, so we'll add a little bit of that blue into that area. Okay, and alright, I was mentioning I thought gray would look kind of interesting on here. I do have gray on the rocks, and things are getting kind of a little bit too just straight blue in the water for me. Alright, now here's what starts happening. As I do this, that big buildup of alcohol ink on this surface right here is kind of going back into solution. You know, it's like I'm going over it with the gray and it's dissolving the ink that I've laid down in that area. Maybe because, I don't know, maybe this is just pen, you know, if you go in with something like a pen that's really super juicy, then it almost acts as like a blender pen, you know, it kind of puts the ink that you've laid down back into solution, and it's almost kind of removing some of the ink, but you'll have to just kind of go with that, you know, and try to utilize that to your advantage, maybe by creating extra textures or whatnot, and you know, instead of it being kind of a weakness, you know, have it become somewhat of a strength. Meaning, you know, you can create some additional texture, or maybe it would be very difficult otherwise with dye-based inks, you know, something like that. Alright, so I've kind of gone with these streaky types of forms. Let's try some other types of textures. I'll just, I don't know, do these little impressionistic types of touches, maybe. It won't look like impressionism, but just in terms of my marks on here. See, I'm going back in with kind of a lighter blue over some of this, and it's kind of dissolving some of those tones underneath. But let's try to utilize this pen for something, or the brush tip of it, to be more specific. Try to get some extra little textures in here. Definitely not a how-to video unless it comes out good. It's just more of a kind of experiment video. I'm just trying to, I don't know, experiment, explore, I guess would be the good term for it. When I put it over certain areas, it kind of picks up some of the ink, and then I go down here and it kind of, you know, transfers some of that ink, so it's just kind of an interesting process. I'm sure that some of you who have been working with alcohol pens for a long time really would have a lot more control over it than I do. And of course there's different types of papers. A lot of people don't just do coloring straight on glossy. They'll use kind of more specialty papers. I don't know, might be more conducive for this type of treatment of the imagery or scene, whatever. Alright, we see, or can see, some different types of foliage in here. And I wasn't, you know, I could have stamped that in a color, but I didn't, because we were just doing some stamp sketching, so let's go in and add a little bit of tone into those little water lily grass textures in the water. Subtle, huh? you don't really see too much of a change because we're working in a very light value of this hue. There's a little grass on the water's edge. Put a little tone into that. It's one of those instances where, you know, you're working with a medium where you really can make some, after something gets to a certain value, you can go back in and lighten it up just by removing some of that ink. You can take your blender pen or whatever and go back in and just to remove some of that ink. Sometimes I used to use, in college I had a set of alcohol pens, and I would use just rubbing alcohol on a Q-tip and kind of move colors around a little bit. Okay, this one is a brighter green, kind of around the water's edge. That looks pretty good, I guess. It's definitely more visible. Visible value of that green hue. Now see where there's some green grass along the water's surface, I'm putting some down here in the water to represent the reflection of that hue above. So well, it looks a little bit better. It's more interesting with a little bit of that color, huh? Okay. Seems like it's lacking something, though. Let's go with this darker gray. I don't know if I've used it on here yet. Let's hit those shadows a little bit more. I want a little bit more kind of a dynamic range in here, using some darker tones. Let's go for a little bit of texture. I'll kind of dab like this instead of coloring straight. Okay. Here's a real faint value of this hue. Okay. Color is pale lilac. Seem to be in order. No, it's not that. It's not as pale as I'd want, but let's go ahead and use it unless I have a lighter one. I don't see a lighter tone value of it in this, so let's just add it in, and maybe I'll have to blend it out a little bit. Yeah, it's a little bit clunky up there. Okay, so that color can be reflected on some of these rocks. Okay. I want to do it too extreme, but just here and there within that given space. You don't want to color in the whole thing because, you know, you want there still to be this element of light and dark within that space. We can add some of it as reflective. Reflective hue. Down below. Looks okay, I guess. That pink and, or that purple and green do pair fairly well with each other. As I do this, it occurs to me that, well, it doesn't surprise me, but I think it would be good to have gone with a bit of a, kind of a fusion of dye-based ink and alcohol ink in here. Okay, this is a blender pen. I'm just going to see if I can blend a little bit of this, that pale lilac in with the composition a little bit more. It was a little bit too stiff where I laid it down, so just kind of diffusing it a little bit. It's like an eraser, these blender pens. It's just kind of filled up with a binder, whatever, you know, that alcohol binder that's been used in the different colors. I don't know if dye-based ink would apply over the top of this alcohol. Let's try it. It might not stick, but we'll see. Okay, I have a bit of black in this tip right here. I'm just going to use it with my blue ink. It changes it. That looks pretty good, I guess. Okay. This is kind of a medium blue by Marvy called Light Blue. Yeah, that's a good fusion if there was. It was just too... I felt it was a little bit too textured, okay? I didn't want that texture over everything, but if you kind of blend in certain areas, then you have the texture as more as like a little embellishment somewhere, rather than kind of it being the dominant feature within a given space. You know, like that whole space, now that little bit of texture kind of stands out a little bit more, and it's kind of more something that makes that area kind of special, I guess, than for the whole thing to be done in that tone, or that texture and method. Okay, that was the light blue, which is more of a medium blue. Okay, here's the darker blue. I'm going to try with something like a navy. And this perimeter right around here is really sticky feeling at this point in time. For some reason I feel like that light blue applied a little bit faster than this blue. I don't know why. Viscosities might be a little bit different or something. Okay, that looks okay. But the one color that should really bring it together is black. I stamped all my imagery in black, okay, in that stamp sketch. Now I find that that same color and I was going to say value, but I don't know if I'll get all the way to black. But that same color being used, or tint, tint? I don't know. Gosh, I left a big fingerprint there. Alright, I need to, here, let me use this. I'll hold this down with this. Whatever you stamp your darkest objects in, oftentimes that same color is the one that kind of brings everything together. So I find that much nicer now than, say, over here. It's just, it's too open for me, I think. Yeah, it's creating a little bit more of a atmosphere, I guess. Here. Kind of capping it off like that. Alright, let's do the same thing in the water. Okay, let's look down here in the shadows. Okay. Let's create a little bit of a vignette. Let's go down here in the bottom left and right corner. This is the thing that, I don't know, you don't have to do this on all your scenes. I don't do this on all of mine, but it's a good kind of tool, the vignette, for emphasizing certain things within your scene. But it also, if a scene is kind of feeling a little bit, I don't know, scattered or something like this, this can bring it in a little bit and kind of tie everything together. This is one of the scenes that I don't know, probably used more alcohol ink on this scene than I have in, oh, I don't know, most of the scenes that I've ever done. Usually don't fill in big areas like that with alcohol ink, you know, or as a base undertone. It's good to know that you can add that down and apply dye-based inks over the top of it. I don't know all dye-based inks. There's some inks that are fairly thick and just might, you know, lay on the top of the ink without having any kind of penetration into the paper, I don't know, or the cardstock. Okay. Shadows a little bit. I do think that some of this ink is sitting on top of that alcohol ink, because anytime I touch an area it kind of comes off of my finger. I think it'll be fine though. I mean, once you let this ink kind of sit there for a while, it should be fine, and it should set up and dry. And of course we can always spray seal. Okay, now one thing that I noticed after going over it with that black, I'm missing some of that green that was in there. Let's try to add a little bit more excitement to some of that green. Here's apple green, okay? It's a little bit brighter. Let's add a couple different tones of green, okay? It's a different, it's a little bit of a different value of green, but It's certainly a little bit of a warmer temperature and brighter green, okay? So just adding a touch of it. I'm not adding it everywhere that I added the other green, but I'm just kind of adding a touch of it into those areas, just so there's a little bit of variation within really some of the more subtle features or smaller features. I wouldn't say that green back there is too subtle. It, you know, it does stand out a little bit, but it's kind of nice. It's kind of nice to add a little bit of an element of a brighter intensity of a given hue. Okay, this is a little bit of a kind of an olive green, elm green they call it. Okay, so I'll add a little bit of that here and there just to add a little bit of variation. Adding these little dabs of it. Alright, now let's see. Here is kind of a darker blue. I'm never going to use that one. That's way too dark. This is beautiful. Cerulean Blue. Oh, this one's French blue. Love them, but boy, I don't know. They're pretty dark. Let me try a bit of this one. This is the Cerulean Blue. I was going to say only in the darkest of areas, but I don't even know if I want that. It's really bright. Some of the brightest colors sometimes are in the shadows, but if I add too much of this, it'll be too extreme. But it's not bad in a little tiny spots here and there in the darkest of areas. Okay, it's okay. It's looking at okay. It's starting to achieve a little bit of a kind of a color glow, maybe. Okay, let's try to go back to some of this. I think I used some of this apricot in my last video. It looks like it faded out a little bit after it dried, so I'm trying to add a little bit of warmth to those rocks, the lighter areas of the rocks. Okay, so if there's a little bit of this warmth on those rocks, I'm going to add a little bit of that warmth into my sky as well. Okay, a little bit of that temperature. If you have it being reflected off certain things down here, sometimes it looks good to add that, you know, into your sky. Figures your light source, which happens to be this general area of the sky up here. See, I've added that little temperature. There's a little bit of warmth up there, so that this warmth being reflected kind of makes a little bit more sense. Alright, let's see what we can do here with some additional textures. I like to kind of reinsert some really light values in here, almost, well, in this case it'll be the white of the original paper, you know. white of the paper that was our foundation here. But I'm only going to do that in the lighter areas of the scene, okay? I don't know, I might put a speck of it here and there, but for the most part, if you get this kind of this ripply, shimmery water, that means that that's going to be where the there's going to be the most amount of illuminating, I don't know, shimmers on the water surface. This side of the boat. Now let's carry that idea on the other side, okay? Okay, so we have this little passage of that shimmering water. Okay, see it down here, all those little dots, and it kind of goes up this way, and in the back of that boat right there. Okay, and some of these rocks right here, maybe in the lighter areas, I could put a few little highlights. The highlights, again, are just going to be applied to those rocks that retain some of the lighter values, or, you know, or I was going to say, or have a little bit of white of the paper on them still showing. And again, that's just for the reason because you know, you wouldn't really have highlights on something of an object in the shade, you know, where it's, you know, you really can't see any of it. I do like all those alcohol pens, though. All that layered tone in here. It's pretty fun to work with in terms of just laying down kind of transparent, almost glazes of color and building those up. I guess if I did get to a point where I wanted to add more color, but you know, the saturation of alkyl ink was just too extreme and it wasn't accepting anymore. It just, you know, was causing the ink to go back into solution. You can always kind of spray it with a workable fixative, okay, so that'll seal everything that you've laid down, then you can go back into it and add additional, you know, colors or touches or whatever on top of that sealed version, okay? Very textural. Okay. I don't know. It's kind of fun looking like that. Multi-layers of tone. Once I get comfortable doing kind of layering like that, I'll kind of figure out how to get back in there and add a little bit more of a kind of a textured surface by utilizing that process of, I don't know, kind of lifting, you know, what you've already laid down a little bit with lighter tones or a blender pen. Right, this is French blue, just deepening some of these shadows in here. I don't know, it's kind of interesting having a little bit of that super bright blue in those shadows right there. It kind of stands out. It probably wouldn't be the color that you'd really see, you know, in reality, but it's kind of fun as a little kind of subtle touch within within those areas here. Actually, that blue looks pretty good here. I have to be kind of careful about it, though. Because it is really dark. Like that. Adding it to some of these little grass, little clusters created by the water lilies. I don't know, fairly rich surface in terms of some of the different textures achieved on here. Let's take a look closer up and see what benefits we can get from some of those pens. Certainly the more specific little areas down here, we see some streaking and some kind of these more little dabs, you know, these little ovals laid down in there over the top of some of those forms. Trying to think if it looks dimensional. I guess so, a little bit. Especially for the fact that those alcohol inks are transparent, so we can see where some of them have overlapped other colors, and, you know, we get this secondary color out of that overlapping. Sky looks okay, not great, but really faint shades of something, so we don't need a whole other ink pad or something like that. We can just utilize you know, lighter pen. And I don't know, overall, kind of interesting look. I have a feeling that with these pens too, what we see is what we get. Unlike some types of ink pads, where sometimes when it dries it takes on kind of a different appearance, you know, as far as how saturated something looks, especially. Sometimes it looks a little bit more dull. But again, you know, we can always utilize things like spray fixatives and whatnot to kind of reintroduce a lot of the vibrancy and intensity of a kind of a wet ink look. All right, just going back in, you know, see, I thought we can use a little bit more continuity between these rocks again and the reflected colors up there. So just going in here and adding some of this pink here and there. So it's kind of subtle, but it kind of creates that relationship with all the different forms in here, talking about some different colored light that's in the scene. Okay, I think that looks like it. I don't know, it's different. It's different than what I would be able to achieve just strictly using one media and typically one type of applicator, you know, to get these different forms in there. It's kind of nice to be able to get a little bit more specific, utilizing something like alcohol inks. If you're working on matte paper, you can kind of utilize colored pencils or watercolor pencils, things like that. You can utilize it along with alcohol inks and dye-based inks. So, I don't know, why limit ourselves to any one given medium? You know, if there's other types of little things that a different medium can provide in a much easier way. Okay, so anyways, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it.